Hi, hello, good morning everyone. So today we are going to present our presentation. But before we begin our presentation, allow us to introduce ourselves. And my name is Maria Agustina Eva and my partner is
Aisyah Andina Ayu Sekar Lestari.
The topic of our presentation is Lucy Wu and her Chinese American identity.
This presentation is divided into 10 slides, and in the first slide, I'm gonna tell you what is the content that we're gonna explain. In the first part, we've already introduced ourselves. Then, in the second part, Maria is gonna tell you who are the antagonists and the protagonists. Next, I will explain the short summary of the Great Wall of Lucy Wu. In the next part, Maria and I are gonna concentrate on Lucy's American and Chinese identity. And in the next part, we're gonna give some conclusions.
I'd like to turn to the protagonist and the antagonist of this novel. The protagonists are, first, we know that Lucy Wu is the narrator of this story. From the beginning until the end of this story is filled by Lucy Wu. So, Lucy Wu is the protagonist one. Second, Yipo is also the protagonist. We can see Yipo is the second central figure due to Yipo's journey, stories, and daily life are part of the story from the beginning to the end. Furthermore, Yipo doesn't obstruct the main purpose of Lucy. Then, I'd like to move on to the next point is the antagonists of this novel are first, Lucy's parents. Lucy's parents insist that Lucy should attend to her Chinese school. It's against with Lucy's wishes. Second, Regina. She's Lucy's elder sister who asks Lucy to pay more attention to her Chinese identity. Third, Swan often consults Lucy to withdraw from the basketball captain competition. And the last antagonist is Talent, who bothered by reminding her that Chinese school is more important than the basketball.
Next, the short summary of The Great Wall of Lucy Wu. The Great Wall of Lucy Wu is a novel by Wendy Wan Long Shang that tells about a Chinese American girl named Lucy who is more inclined to her Americanness and feels the struggle with her Chineseness. The arrival of Yipo from China, who was the sister of Popo, Lucy's grandmother, ruined all the plans Lucy had put together to realize her best year, where she had to share her room with Yipo, who felt very strange to her. Lucy, who has difficulties with her Chineseness, has to deal with Yipo, who is very Chinese by speaking Chinese only, cook Chinese food, read Chinese newspaper, and other things related to China that makes her a constant reminder of Lucy's Chinese identity. When Lucy, in the midst of planning her best year, she had to attend the Chinese school she didn't want to attend, leave basketball practice she had been waiting for, and face Yipo who kept making her disturbed. Lucy won her first basketball competition as captain with full support of Yipo, who was getting closer to her, so she was a little unwilling when she had to let go of Yipo, who would go for a while.
This leads me to the next my point. Let's focus on the all sides. You're yellow on the outside, white on the inside. It's Regina's line. Chinese food was okay, but not all the time. We are Chinese American. All sides explain that Lucy more inclined with her American side. Lucy thinks that although she is a Chinese, she is also an American too. In written script, Lucy is more proud when she is an American. Next, how could Taylor not have heard of Bass Summit? This emphasizes that Lucy more familiar with America's knowledge. And then, after of waiting, Halloween was going to be on Saturday night, the perfect day to have a big bet. In this side, Lucy is more understanding and closer to America's culture. Next, I close my eyes and wish for just a second that I had American relatives like everyone else. Here, Lucy feels embraced and more proud when she has an American relatives. Lucy considers American friends cooler and more valued. And the last is no one had dumplings at the birthday party. You had pizza or hot dogs or tacos, not dumplings. This vividly emphasized that American Lucy's culture is thicker than its main identity, Chinese.
Next, I will discuss about Lucy's Chinese identity in the Great Wall of Lucy Wu. As you can see, this quote refers to one meaning that shows how Lucy doesn't really care about her Chinese identity and feels that exploring her Chinese identity is unnecessary and unfair if it has to sacrifice other things that she prioritizes, like having to leave basketball practice because of the mismatch with the Chinese school schedule. In the next slide, the first and the second quote refers to Lucy's lack of knowledge about the culture and history in Chinese, where she never really looked into and learned it as a Chinese should have. The third quote shows how Lucy misinterpreted the meaning of the word in Chinese, where big in Chinese refers to growing up and Lucy considered it to mean fat. The fourth quote shows how Lucy had difficulty using Chinese vocabulary in a conversation. She could not speak freely without feeling nervous about stopping in the middle due to the lack of vocabulary in Chinese that she mastered. The first quote shows how Lucy feels unfamiliar with her Chineseness. She lives in America, intersects with American culture, language, food, and also rarely uses Chinese at home. Therefore, she is not so attached to her Chinese identity. The second quote refers to Lucy's confusion about the Chinese family tree that makes her feel strange about her Chinese culture. When she was a kid, there are many women she called Ai, which means aunt, but then she found out that these women are her mother's friends, who have no family relations to her mother. The third quote shows how Lucy began to open up with her Chineseness, which was influenced by Yipo's presence, where she wanted to be brave like Yipo in facing difficult situations as a Chinese. The fourth quote shows how Lucy is getting used to applying Chinese into conversations and no longer too difficult to arrange words while speaking in Chinese.
And the conclusion are, after analyzing the character of Lucy Wu in the Great Wall of Lucy Wu, we can see in the process of Lucy in tracing her identity further. Then, this deepening of her identity is not only done by herself, but assisted by other figures around her.
When Lucy was in the process of exploring her Chinese identity, in the presence of Yipo, she discovered many things she had previously hated and disliked turned into good things that led her to happiness, even succeeding in making it her best year.